A Daughter of the Samurai. Chapter 18. Strange Customs. We had a large stone church in our suburb, which was not quite paid for, and a society of church women called the Ladies' Aid occasionally gave a fair or a concert and sometimes a play with local talent in order to obtain money to add to the fund. One evening, Mother, Matsuo, and I attended one of these concerts. On the program was a vocal solo of some classic selection. The singer was the gifted daughter of a wealthy citizen and had received her musical education in Europe. I knew her as a rather quiet young woman with a gentle voice and a dignified manner. Therefore, I was surprised when the music began to see her step forward briskly and informally, bow smilingly to the audience, right and left, and then, with much facial expression, give a vocal exhibition of high, clear trills and echoes that, to my untrained ears, was a strange and marvellous discord, but the most wonderful thing that I had ever heard in my life. The effect left on my mind was of brightness, quick motion, and high-pitched sound. In strong contrast is our classic music, which always suggests subdued colours, slow movement, and deep, mellow tones. Also, like most Japanese art, our music requires listening eyes as well as ears, otherwise its appeal is lost. Our classic stage is always the same. The entire back is one solid board of natural cedar wood, on which is painted a gigantic dwarf pine. The floor is of camphor wood and is bare. On this, the singers, who, of course, are always men, sit as motionless as dolls. Their dress is the old-fashioned, soft-hued garment of ceremony. Each one, before beginning to sing, makes a slow, deep bow and with studied deliberation places his fan horizontally before him on the floor. Then, with his hands on his knees, palms down, and sitting very erect and motionless, he tells in song, and with incredible elocutionary power, some wonderful tale of war and romance, but wholly without movement of body or change of facial expression. At the close, the singer's face is often flushed with feeling, but with no change of expression. He bows, then gently takes up his fan and resumes his former impassive attitude. The audience sits in profound silence. The listeners may be touched to tears or raised to the highest pitch of excitement, but this can be detected only by the sound of subdued sniffling or the catch of a quick sigh. For centuries, repression has been the keynote of everything of a high character, and the greatest tribute that can be paid to a singer or an actor of classic drama is to be received in deep silence. One thing in America to which I could not grow accustomed was the joking attitude in regard to women and money. From men and women of all classes, from newspapers, novels, lectures, and once even from the pulpit, I heard allusions to amusing stories of women secreting money in odd places, coaxing it from their husbands, borrowing it from a friend, or saving it secretly for some private purpose. There was never anything dishonourable applied in this. Perhaps the money was saved to get new curtains for the parlour, or even a birthday present for the husband. These jokes were a puzzle to me, and a constantly growing one, for as time passed on, I myself saw things which made me realize that probably a foundation of serious truth might lie behind and beneath some of the amusing stories. Our suburb was small, and we were all interested in each other's affairs, so I was acquainted with almost everybody. I knew the ladies to be women of education and culture, yet there seemed to be among them a universal and openly confessed lack of responsibility about money. They all dressed well and seemed to have money for specific purposes, but no open purse to use with free and responsible judgment. Once, at a church fair, where I had a table, several ladies, after walking around the hall and examining the various booths, had bought some small cheap articles, but left the expensive ones, saying, "My husband will be here later on, and I'll get him to buy it," or, "When the gentlemen come, those high-priced things will sell." I have never known a Japanese man to buy anything for his home, or be expected to. Once, when I was shopping with a friend, she stopped at her husband's office to ask him for money. I thought that was strange enough, but a still more curious thing happened. When I went with Mother to a meeting of the church ladies, where they were raising a curtain amount for some unusual purpose, the Ladies' Aid had recently made a great many calls on the husbands' purses, and so this time each member had pledged herself to bring $5, which she must obtain without asking her husband for it. The meeting I attended was the one where the money was handed in, each lady telling as she gave it how she had succeeded in getting her $5. Most had saved it in various ways, a little at a time. One said that she had made a real sacrifice and returned to her milliner a new hat, paid for but not worn, receiving in exchange one that was $5 less in price. Another had sold 2 theatre tickets, which had been given her. Still another told in very witty rhyme how she, a poor Ladies' Aid lady, had spent most of her leisure time for a week and had pledged herself for a week longer in darning stockings for the children of her neighbour, a rich, non-Ladies' Aid lady. The meeting was intensely interesting. It reminded me of our poem-making parties, only of course this was gayer, and these stories were on an undignified subject. I enjoyed it all until a pretty, bright and beautifully dressed woman rose and said that she didn't know how to save money and she didn't know how to earn it. She had promised not to cheat in her charge account at the store, and she had promised not to ask her husband for the $5, so she had done the only thing that was left for her to do. She had stolen it from her husband's pocket when he was asleep. This report caused a great deal of merriment, but I was saddened. All the reports seemed tragic after she said, "That was the only thing left to do." It seemed incredible, here in America where women are free and commanding, that a woman of dignity and culture, the mistress of a home, the mother of children, should be forced either to ask her husband for money or be placed in a humiliating position. When I left home, Japan at large was still following the old custom of educating a girl to be responsible for the well-being of her entire family, husband included. The husband was the lord of the family, but the wife was mistress of the home, and according to her own judgment, controlled all its expenses. The house, the food, the children's clothing and education, all social and charitable responsibilities, and her own dress, the material and style of which were expected to conform to her husband's position. Where did she get the money? The husband's income was for his family, and his wife was the banker. When he wanted money for himself, he asked for it, and it was her pride to manage so that she could allow him the amount suitable for a man of his standing. As to what the requirements of his position might be, there was little question, for to know this was part of the wife's education. The husband might shrug his shoulders and say, "It's very inconvenient," but the entire house and its standing were his pride, and any disarrangement that would mar the whole was his loss. Therefore the needs of the home came first. A man married primarily as a duty to the gods and to his ancestors, secondarily to obtain a mistress for his home who would guide it in such a manner that it, and his family might be a credit to him. If she managed well, he was complimented by his friends. If she failed, he was pitied. This was true of all classes except lords of large estates or financial kings of business. In these cases there was a home treasurer, but he was at the call of the mistress, and her judgment as to her needs was supreme. The treasurer's only power of protest lay in the right to say, with many apologies, "The honourable mistress is about to overdraw her account." The hint was generally sufficient, for a Japanese woman, like everyone in a responsible position, desired to do her duty creditably. Conventional forms are losing in rigidity year by year, but even yet the people are considered influenced by rules, which in the past were uniform and recognized by all. Any marked deviation from these is still considered bad form. The standards of my own and my adopted country differed so widely in some ways, and my love for both lands was so sincere that sometimes I had an odd feeling of standing upon a cloud in space and gazing with measuring eyes upon two separate worlds. At first, I was continually trying to explain, by Japanese standards, all the queer things that came every day before my surprised eyes, for no one seemed to know the origin or significance, or even the most familiar customs, nor why they existed and were followed. To me, coming from a land where there is an unforgotten reason for every fashion of dress, for every motion in etiquette, indeed, for almost every trivial act of life, this indifference of Americans seemed very singular. Mother was a wonderful source of information, but I felt a hesitation about asking too many questions, for my curiosity was so frequently about odd, trifling, unimportant things, such as why ladies kept on their hats in church while men took theirs off. What was the use of the china plates which I saw hanging on the walls of some beautiful houses? Why guests are taken to the privacy of a bedroom and asked to put their hats and cloaks on the bed, a place that suggested sleep or sickness. Why people made social calls in the evening, the time of leisure in Japan. What originated the merriment and nonsense of Halloween and April's Fool's Days, and why such a curious custom exists as the putting of gifts in stockings. Stockings, the veriest, humblest of all the garments that are worn. It seemed strange to me that there should never be any hint or allusion to these customs in conversation, in books or in newspapers. In Japan, tradition, folklore, and symbolism are before one all the time. The dress of the people on the streets, the trademark on the swinging curtains of the shops, the decorations on chinaware, the call of the street vendor, the cap of the soldier, the pleated skirt of the schoolgirl. Each points back to some well-known tale of how or why. Even the narrow blue and white towel of the jinrikisha men and the layer lunchbox of the workman bear designs suggesting an ancient poem or a bit of folklore, as familiar to every Japanese child as are the melodies of Mother Goose to the children of America. One afternoon, at a small reception, a lady spoke pleasantly to me of the healthfulness to the foot of a shoe like my sandal, and then referred with disapproval to the high heels and pointed toes then in vogue. "Why are these shapes worn?" I asked. "What started them?" "Oh, for no reason," she replied. "Just a fashion, like you're folding your dress over left-handed." "But there is a reason for that," I said. "It is only on a corpse that the kimono is folded over from the right." That interested her, and we had a short talk on the peculiarity of Japanese always honouring the left above the right in everything, from the imperial throne to the tying of a knot. Then, lightly touching on the back of my sash, she asked, Would you mind telling me what this bundle is for? Is it to carry the little babies on? Oh, no, I replied. It is my sash, and it is only an ornament. A baby is carried in a hammock-like scarf swung from the nurse's shoulders. The material of your sash is very beautiful, she said. May I ask why you arranged it in that flat pad instead of spreading it out so the design can be seen? Since she seemed really interested, I willingly explained with the various styles of tying a sash for persons differing in rank, age, occupation, and for different occasions. There came the final question, why do you have so much goods in it? That pleased me, for to a Japanese, the material beauty of an article is always secondary to its symbolism. I told her of the original meaning of the 12-inch width and 12-foot length and explained how it represented much of the mythology and astrology of ancient Oriental belief. This is very interesting, she said as she turned to go, especially about the signs of the zodiac and all that, but it's a shame to hide so much of that magnificent brocade by folding it in. And don't you think yourself, little lady, and she gave me a merry smile, that it's positively wicked to buy so many yards of lovely goods just to be wasted and useless? And she walked away with a long train of expensive velvet trailing behind her on the floor. Mother's furniture, which was of beautiful wood and some of it carved, at first made me feel as if I were in a museum. But when I went into other homes, I found that none were simple and plain. Many reminded me of go-downs, so crowded were they with not only chairs, tables and pictures, but numbers of little things, small statues, empty vases, shells and framed photographs, as well as rare and costly ornaments, all scattered about with utter disregard, according to Japanese standards of order or appropriateness. It was several months before I could overcome the impression that the disarranged profusion of articles was a temporary convenience, and that very soon they would be returned to the go-down. Most of these objects were beautiful, but some of them were the shape of a shoe or of the sole of the foot. This seemed to be a favourite design, or else my unwilling eyes always spied it out, for in almost every house I entered I would see, in a paperweight, a vase, or some other small article. Once I even saw a little wooden shoe used as a holder for toothpicks. Generations of prejudice made this very objectionable to me, for in Japan the feet are the least honoured part of the body, and the most beautiful or costly gift would lose all its value if it had the shape of footwear. And Japanese curios, they were everywhere, and in the most astonishingly inappropriate surroundings. Lunchbox and rice bowls on parlour tables, cheap roll pictures hanging on elegant walls, shrine gongs used for dinner room table bells, sword guards for paperweights, ink boxes for handkerchiefs, and letter boxes for gloves, marriage cups for pin trays, and even little bamboo spittoons I have seen used to hold flowers. In time, my stubborn mind learned, to some extent, to separate an article from its surroundings, and then I began to see its artistic worth with the eyes of an American. Also, I acquired the habit, whenever I saw absurd things here, which evidently rose from little knowledge of Japan, of trying to recall a similar absurdity in Japan regarding foreign things, and I never failed to find more than one to offset each single instant here. One time a recollection was forced upon me by an innocent question from a young lady who told me, in a tone of disbelief, that she had heard in a lecture on Japan that elegantly dressed Japanese ladies sometimes wore ordinary, cheap Chanel tablecloths around their shoulders in place of scarves. I could only laugh and acknowledge that, a few years before, that had been a popular fashion. Imported articles were rare and expensive, and since we never used table covers ourselves, we had no thought of there being anything but beautiful shawls. I had not the courage to tell her that I had worn one myself, but I did tell her, however, of something that occurred at my home in Nagaoka when I was a child. On my father's return from one of his visits to the capital, he bought Ishi and Kin each a large Turkish towel with a coloured border and a deep fringe. The maids, their hearts swelling with pride, went to temple service wearing the towels around their shoulders. I can see them yet as they walked proudly out of the gateway, the white length spread evenly over their best dresses and the fringe dangling in its stiff newness about their long Japanese sleeves. It would be a funny sight to me now, but then I was lost in admiration, and it seemed perfectly natural that they should be, as they were, the envy of all beholders. Of all my experiences in trying to see Japanese things with American eyes, one particularly inharmonious combination was foolishly annoying trial to me for many months. The first time I called on Mrs. Hoyt, the hostess of an especially beautiful home, my eyes were drawn to a lovely carved magnote, hand of grandchild it is called in Japan, but in America it has the practical name Scratch My Back, which was hanging by its silk cord on the cover of an ebony cabinet. Beside it, thrown carefully over the same cord, was a rosary of crystal and coral beads. The little ivory finger rake was exquisitely carved, and the rosary was of rare pink coral and flawless crystal. But to the eye of an Oriental, all beauty was ruined by the strange arrangement. It was like putting the Bible and a toothbrush side by side on a parlour table. I did not criticize the judgment of the hostess. Her superior taste in all things artistic was beyond question, and in America the Magonote was an object of art only. From that viewpoint it was properly placed. I realized this, and yet whenever afterward I entered that room, I persistently kept my eyes turned away from the ebony cabinet. It was only after 2 years of close friendship with the hostess that I had the courage to tell her of my shocked first visit to her home. She laughs at me even yet, and I laugh too, but there is a warm feeling of satisfaction in my heart this moment as I remember that the rosary and the magonote no longer hang side by side. There was another thing in Mrs. Hoyt's home which was removed at the same time the rosary and the hand of grandchild parted company. It was a large coloured photograph of a scene in Japan, not an ancient print but a modern photograph. It was an attractive picture in graceful arrangement and delicate colouring, and my hostess had placed it in a conspicuous place. Her ignorant eyes beheld only its artistic beauty, but my heart turned sick with shame. That picture would never have been allowed in any respectful house in Japan, as it was the photograph of a well-known courtesan of Tokyo taken at the door of her professional home. Oh, why do Japanese sell those things? I shudderingly asked myself, but immediately came the puzzling response. Why do Americans want to buy? One day I went into the city with a friend to do some shopping. We were on a streetcar when my attention was attracted by a little girl sitting opposite us who was eating something. Children in Japan do not eat on the street or in a public place, and I didn't know then that it is not the custom in America as it is with us never to eat except at table. My friend and I were busy talking, so for a while I did not notice the child, but when I chanced to glance at her again, I was surprised to see that she was still eating. 2 or 3 times afterwards, I looked at her and I finally turned to my friend. "I wonder what the child is eating," I said. "She's not eating anything," my friend replied. "She is chewing gum." Again, I looked at the child. She was sitting, drooped and weary, her loose hands lying in her lap and her feet spread around her bundle in a very awkward and difficult position. As I watched her tired face, suddenly I remembered something that had happened on the train on my trip across the continent. "Is she sick?" I asked. "No, I think not. Why do you ask?" "I think I took that medicine on the train," I replied. "Oh, no," the friend said, laughing. "Chewing gum is not a medicine. It's a sort of wax just to chew." "Why does she do it?" I asked. "Oh, most children of her class chew gum, more or less. It is not an elegant thing to do. I don't allow my children to touch it." I said nothing more, but a partial light began to dawn upon my experience on the train. I had been uncomfortably car sick, and Mrs. Holmes had given me a small, flat block of fragrant medicine which she said would cure nausea. I put it in my mouth and chewed a long time, but I could not swallow it. After a while I got tired, but Mrs. Holmes was still eating hers, so I concluded it must be a medicine possessing wonderful merit, as it would not dissolve. I wrapped it carefully in a piece of white tissue paper and put it in the little mirror case that I wore in my sash. I never heard what originated this peculiar custom, but I think I've never found anything odd in America for which I could not find an equivalent in Japan. Gum chewing reminded me of the hodzuki blowing, a habit common among the Japanese children and also much practiced by tea-house girls and women of humble class. The hodzuki is made from a little red berry having a smooth, tough peeling. The core is very soft, and with proper care it can be squeezed out, leaving the unbroken peeling in the shape of a tiny round lantern. This little ball is elastic, and though it has no special taste, children love to hold it in the mouth and by gently blowing the hollow shell make what they call mouth music. It sounds somewhat like the soft, distant croaking of a pond frog. Hodzuki blowing is not beautiful music, nor is it a pretty custom, but it is neither harmful nor unclean. The worst that can be said of it is what many a nurse calls to her charge: "Take that squeaky thing out of your mouth. It will make your lips pouty and ugly." Chapter 19. Thinking. At the broad corner where our front and side porches joined was where my hammock swung. It was shaded by a big apple tree, and I used to put in a big cushion and sit Japanese fashion while I read. I could never get used to lying in it, as Mother sometimes did, but I liked to imagine that I was in an open kago, a quiet, not a swaying one, and watch for glimpses between the trees of carriages and country teams that passed occasionally on the road beyond the big evergreens and the stone wall. From there, too, I could look across a little stretch of green and on through the break made in the lilac hedge by the drawbridge to the home of our nearest neighbour. We did not have many close neighbours, for our suburb was a wide-spreading one with the houses far apart, each set in the midst of its own stretch of lawn and shrubbery. Many of these lawns were separated from each other by only a narrow gravelled path or a carriage road. I loved these fenceless homes. In Japan, I had never known of a home not enclosed by walls of stone or plaster. Even humble village huts had hedges of brushwood or bamboo. One of the odd fancies of my childhood was to imagine how wonderful it would be if, without warning, all hedges should fall and the hidden gardens be suddenly revealed to every passer-by. In my American home, I felt that my childhood wish had come true. The fences were all down and the flowers and the grass free for all to see and enjoy. Then my mind drifted to the gardens of Japan, where was shut-in beauty for the few. I was thinking all this one pleasant afternoon as I sat in the hammock sewing, while Mother was tying up the crimson rambler that covered part of the porch with a curtain of green. "Mother," I said suddenly, as a new thought came to me, "did you ever think of a Japanese woman as being in prison, with the key to her cell in her pocket, and not unlocking the door because it would not be a polite thing to do?" "Why, no," said Mother, surprised. "What are you thinking, Etsu?" "That idea came to me the day I went to my first afternoon tea. Do you remember?" "Yes, indeed," said Mother, smiling. "You looked like a drooping blossom as you came to the path with Miss Helen. She said that everyone was there and that you were the belle of the ball, and then you sat down on the porch step and quietly remarked that people here were just like their lawns. I never quite understood what you meant." "I shall never forget that day," I said. "All the time I was dressing to go, I pictured how the ladies would look, sitting in Mrs. Anderson's parlour in their pretty dresses and wavy hair, talking pleasantly the way they do when we make calls. But they did not sit at all. It was like being in the street, for they all kept on their hats and gloves and stood in groups or walked around the crowded rooms, all talking at once. I was so confused by the buzz of voices that my head was really dizzy, but it was all intensely interesting and not exactly undignified. People asked me queer questions, but everyone was kind and everyone was happy." "Was it the noise and the excitement that tired you so?" asked Mother. "Oh no, I liked it. It was a happy noise. I liked everything. But on the way home, Miss Helen asked me to tell her about our ladies' receptions in Japan. I could see in my mind just how everyone used to look at an anniversary celebration in my home at Nagaoka. Mother sitting so gentle and stately, and all the ladies in their ceremonial dresses having a quietly nice time and expressing every emotion in a kind of suppressed way by smiles and bows and a few gestures. For at a formal gathering in Japan it is rude to laugh aloud or move too much." "It is beautiful and restful," said Mother. "But it is not nature," I cried, sitting upright in my excitement. "I've been thinking about it ever since. Our conventionality is too extreme. It is narrowing to the soul. I hate to be so happy here and all those patient, subdued women sitting hushed in their quiet homes. Our lives in Japan, a man's as well as a woman's, are like our tied-down trees or our shut-in gardens. I stopped abruptly and then added slowly, "I am growing too outspoken and American-like. It does not suit my training." "You want to pull the fences down too suddenly, dear," said Mother gently. "The flowers of Japan have blossomed in a shadowy garden, and sudden bright sunlight might kill their beauty and develop them into strong, coarse weeds. It is only morning there now. The blossoms will grow with the light, and by the noon the fences will have fallen. Don't pull them down too suddenly." Mother leaned over the hammock and for the first time kissed me softly on the brow. One time I went with some lady friends to see Ellen Terry in The Merchants of Venice. It was an afternoon performance, and after the play we went to some place and had tea. The ladies were all enthusiastic in their praise of the great actress, but I could say nothing, for that afternoon was one of the great disappointments of my life. I'd been quite excited over seeing for the first time a Western actress of worldwide fame, and had formed a picture in my mind of a modest young doctor of laws who would walk across the stage with slow-moving ceremony and with grave dignity deliver the wonderful monologue. Of course, I unconsciously pictured the Japanese ideal. Instead, a tall figure in a scarlet gown and cap, which reminded me of the dress of a Japanese clown, swept onto the stage with the freedom and naturalness that belonged only to a common class people in Japan. Portia talked too loud and fast for a lady of elegance and culture, even in disguise. And the gestures, oh, most of all, the vigorous, man-like gestures, I had no impression but one of shocked surprise. The beautiful moonlight scene where Jessica meets her lover, and also the last act where the two husbands recognize their wives, were full of too many kisses and seemed to be most indelicate. I wished I was not there to see. In the midst of the conversation, one of the ladies who had watched me rather curiously during the last scene turned to me. "Do you have love scenes on the Japanese stage?" she asked. "Oh, yes," I answered. "Our stage shows life as it is, and Japanese are just like other people." "But your face got crimson, little lady, and you looked as if you'd never seen a lover before," she said smilingly. I explained as well as I could that for generations we've been taught that strong emotional expression is not consistent with elegance and dignity. That does not mean that we try to repress our feelings, only that public expression of them is bad form. Therefore, on our stage, the love scenes are generally so demure and quiet that an American audience would not be thrilled at all. But the dignified bearing of our ancestors has a strong effect on Japanese people, for they understand the feeling that is not shown. "What do lovers do when they are, well, very enthusiastic?" asked a young lady. "They gently turn their backs to each other," I replied. "Turn their backs to each other? My stars!" was the very peculiar exclamation of the young lady. In a moment she turned to me again. "Is it really true," she asked, "that in Japan there is no kissing, even between husband and wife?" "There is bowing, you know," I replied. "That is our mode of heart expression." "But you don't mean that your mother never kissed you?" exclaimed the young lady. "What did she do when you came to America?" "Only bowed," I replied, and then she said very gently, "A safe journey for you, my daughter." I had not been here long enough to understand the odd expression that came over the faces of the ladies, nor the moment's silence that followed before the conversation drifted onto other channels. Bowing is not only bending the body, it has a spiritual side also. One does not bow exactly the same to father, younger sister, friend, servant, and child. My mother's long, dignified bow and gentle-voiced farewell held no lack of deep love. I felt keenly each heart-throb, and every other person present also recognized the depth of hidden emotion. Japanese people are not demonstrative. Until late years, the repression of strong emotion was carefully drilled into the mind and life of every Japanese child of the better class. There is much more freedom now than formerly, but the influence of past training is seen everywhere, in art, in literature, and in the customs of daily life. With all the cheerful friendliness of everyday intercourse, there is a certain stiffness of etiquette which holds in check all exuberance of expression. It dictates the ceremonies of birth and the ceremonies of death, and guides everything between working, playing, eating, sleeping, walking, running, laughing, crying. Every motion is chained, and by one's own wish, with the shackles of politeness. A merry girl will laugh softly behind her sleeve. A hurt child chokes back his tears and sobs out, "I'm not crying." A stricken mother will smile as she tells you that her child is dying. A distressed servant will giggle as she confesses having broken your treasured piece of china. This is most mystifying to a foreigner, but it means only an effort to keep in the background. A display of one's own feelings would be rudeness. When in America, people judge the degree of affection between Japanese husband and wife by their conduct to each other. They make a great mistake. It would be as bad form for a man to express approval of his wife or children as it would be for him to praise any other part of himself, and every wife takes pride in conducting herself according to the rigid rules of etiquette, which recognize dignity and humility as the virtues that reflect greatest glory on the home of which she is mistress. One other thing may explain some seeming peculiarities. The Japanese language has no pronouns, their place being taken by adjectives. A humble or a derogatory adjective means my, and a complimentary one means your. A husband will introduce his wife with some such words as, "Pray bestow honourable glance upon foolish wife." By this he simply means, "I want you to meet my wife." A father will speak of his children as ignorant son or untrained daughter when his heart is overflowing with pride and tenderness. I shall never forget my first experience in seeing kissing between a man and woman. It was my trip across the continent when I came from Japan. A seat near me was occupied by a young lady, very prettily dressed and with gentle, almost timid manners. She was a young married woman returning from her first visit to her parents. I was much attracted by her free yet modest actions and planned how I would try to imitate her. One morning I noticed that she was dressed with unusual care, and it was evident that she was nearing the end of her journey. Finally, the train began to slow down, and she watched out of the window with eager interest. The train had barely come to a stand when in rushed a young man who threw his arms around that modest, sweet girl and kissed her several times, and she did not mind it but blushed and laughed, and they went off together. I cannot express my feelings, but I could not help recalling what my mother had said to me just before I started for America. "I have heard, my daughter, that it is a custom for foreign people to lick each other as dogs do." There was no criticism in my mother's heart, nothing but wonder. I repeat her words only as an illustration of how unfamiliar custom may appear to the eyes of a stranger. Years of residence in this country have taught me that the American mode of heart expression has its spiritual side, just as bowing has. I now understand that a kiss expresses kindness or gratitude, friendship or love, each of which is a sacred whisper from heart to heart. Matsuo was very fond of mother, and often, when he had received a new assignment of goods from Japan, he would select something especially pretty or appropriate and bring it to her. Once he gave her a small lacquer box, which looked something like an old-fashioned medicine case hung from the sash by people of ancient time. The outside was marked with lines corresponding to the partitions in a medicine case, but when I opened it, I saw that instead of being a succession of layers, it was an open box divided into two upright partitions to hold playing cards. The lacquer was poor and the work roughly done, but it was an ingenious idea to make a box to hold a means of pleasure in imitation of a case to hold a cure for pain. "What original people Americans are," I said, "but I didn't know that lacquer was made here." Matsuo turned over the little box, and on the bottom I saw a label, "Made in Japan." A few days after, I went down to Matsuo's store and he showed me a whole shelf of articles called Japanese, the sight of which would have filled any inhabitant of Japan with a puzzled wonder as to what the strange European articles could be. They were all marked, "Made in Japan." Matsuo said that they had been designed by Americans in shapes suitable for use in this country and then made to order in Japanese factories and shipped direct to America without having been seen in Japan outside the factory. That troubled me, but Matsuo shrugged his shoulders. As long as Americans want them, design them, order them, and are satisfied, there will be no merchants to supply, he said. But they are not Japanese things. No, he replied, but genuine things do not sell. People think they are too frail and not gay enough. Then he added slowly, the only remedy is in education, and that will have to begin here. That night, I lay awake a long time, thinking. Of course, artistic, appreciative persons are few in comparison to the masses who like heavy vases of green and gold, boxes of cheap lacquer, and gay fans with pictures of a laughing girl with flower hairpins. But if Japan lowers her artistic standards, I sighed, what can she hope for from the world? All that she has or is comes from her art ideals and her pride. Ambition, workmanship, courtesy, all are folded within these 2 words. I once knew a workman, one who was paid by the job, not the hour, to voluntarily undo half a day's work at the cost of much heavy lifting, just to alter by a few inches the position of a stepping stone in a garden. After it was placed to his satisfaction, he wiped the perspiration from his face, then took out his tiny pipe and squatted down nearby to waste still more unpaid-for time in gazing at the reset stone with pleasure and satisfaction in every line of his kindly old face. As I thought of the old man, I wondered if it was worthwhile to exchange the delight of heart pride in one's work for anything. My mind mounted from the gardener to workman, teacher, statesman. It is the same with all. To degrade one's pride, to lose one's hold on the best after having had it, is death to the soul, growth of man or nation. End of part 10. If you are enjoying these audiobooks, please take the time to subscribe, press like, leave a comment, or share this channel with your friends who also enjoy listening to audiobooks. Thank you.